Well, you know, we spent 5 weeks on the book of Job, but this morning we begin a new sermon series based on the book, The Prostitute in the Family Tree. It's by Douglas Adams, not the Douglas Adams that wrote The Hitchhiker's Guide to the World. This is another one. He teaches at Pacific School of Religion, the relationship between worship and arts. Well, he offers us this exercise to get us started. I'm assuming that at some point you all have been to some kind of production where they had an applause sign that told you when to applaud. Well, we've got some others. And? All right, you all are warmed up. We're going to walk through the genealogy of Jesus according to the Gospel of Matthew. You ready?
Sure.
An account of the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, who pretended Sarah was his sister, let Pharaoh have her, and received many cattle. Abraham was the father of Isaac, whose name means laughter. And Isaac was the father of Jacob, who stole his brother's birthright. And Jacob, the father of Joseph, and his brothers, who sold Joseph into slavery. And Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, by Tamar, who played the prostitute. I'm going to have to keep an eye on you, aren't I?
People were already cheering before I got poo up, so I just wanted to throw it in there.
By Tamar, who played the prostitute for the sake of justice. Perez was the father of Hezron.
Okay. I missed one.
And Hezron, the father of Aram. And Aram, the father of Amminadab. And Amminadab, the father of Nahshon, a fine captain of Israel. Nahshon was the father of Salmon. And Salmon, the father of Boaz, by Rahab, the prostitute, who saved God's people. Boaz was the father of Obed by Ruth, the faithful foreigner. Obed was the father of Jesse, the father of King David. And David was the father of Solomon, by the wife of Uriah, who David had set up to be killed. Solomon was the father of Rehoboam, who was faithful to God through much of his reign. But abandoned God for 5 years. And Rehoboam was the father of Abijah, who had 14 wives. Abijah was the father of Asaph, who abandoned God at the end of his life and died of gangrene of the feet. And the father of Uzziah, whose pride brought his fall. Uzziah was the father of Jotham, a very good king in every way. And Ahaz, the father of Jezekiah, who restored the kingdom to piety and justice. Hezekiah was the father of Manasseh, who ruled as king for 55 years, but was evil for all 55 of those years. And Manasseh was the father of Amon, and Amon the father of Josiah, and Josiah the father of Jeconiah, and his brothers, who were all faithful to God throughout their lives, and were all deported to Babylon as slaves.
That's hot. That's what it's supposed to be.
And after the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Salathiel, and Salathiel the father of Zerubbabel, a wise governor chosen by God, and Zerubbabel the father of Abiud, and Zadok the father of Achim, and Mathan the father of Jacob, and Jacob was the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus is born. Sir?
Can we get the version by the other Douglas Adams?
What?
Can we get the version by the other Douglas Adams?
That'd be interesting. Isn't that really fun? What a family tree. Well, you know, I've heard a lot in recent years about God's plan for the family. See, my problem is I can't find any family in the Bible that I really want to copy. Talk about normal God's family, putting the fun in dysfunctional.
Who was that fellow that had 14 wives?
I can look it up. 14, Solomon had 700.
Well,
What would you do with 700 wives?
Whatever they told you.
Welcome to summer.
Oh, I can't even imagine that. But think about the genealogy here. Multiple wives, arguments, murder, denial of marriage, trickery on the wedding night. David had Uriah killed so he could marry Bathsheba. Solomon had 700 wives, like I just said. Abraham tried to give away his wife. Mary and her other children thought Jesus was crazy. Abraham sent Hagar and Ishmael out into the desert to die. God kept telling Hosea to marry the prostitute, whose name was Gomer. Jacob was estranged from his brother for more than 30 years. Nope. There is not a family in the Bible that I think I want to copy. They are all absolutely and completely normal and look just like ours. In his book, Adams points out that there are really two kinds of stories. There are parent stories. Those are the stories we tell our children that are all beautiful. They sound like the Christmas card letter that you get from your friends. Everything's perfect and fine. And then there are the grandparent stories, which are the ones that are more truthful, a little rough around the edges. In small town Missouri, as you might imagine, you get to know the funeral directors. And one day, I was riding down the road with Joe Pickering, and he was really mad at his mother, Jeanette, who I knew also, because she had told his kids about the time that he'd been arrested with marijuana. He had hoped to keep that little factoid away from them. Yeah, but you see, that's grandparent stories. The unvarnished truth. Sometimes they're embarrassing, rough around the edges, but full of humor. Hey, don't miss the humor that we read in the genealogy of Jesus. Now, Who would you expect were the ancestors of Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God? You'd think priests, prophets, very wise people. But who do we find? Prostitutes, murderers, adulterers. That's funny. That's funny. Which makes you wonder if God doesn't have a sense of humor. Actually, if you look around this room, and you'll know God has a sense of humor. You have to wonder sometimes if God doesn't laugh at the funny things that happen. You think about Noah. Have you ever thought about the Noah story? So this guy and his family build this big boat. They get 2 of every kind of animal on it, unless it's actually true that there were 7 of every kind of animal. They get them in this big boat. They seal it up. It rains. They float around for months. During which time, Noah and his family are presumably feeding and cleaning up after all this menagerie on the boat. Can you imagine the smell in the bottom of that ark? And then, when it's all over, Noah's sons are scandalized because the first thing Noah does is plant grapes, make wine, get drunk, get naked in his tent, and pass out. Now, if you're asking me, after that kind of thing, a good stiff drink would seem to be completely in order. And then there's the Jonah story. Have you ever read the Jonah story? You know, we teach the first couple chapters to our kids in Sunday school, but not the last one. You see, Jonah was a huge success. He went into Nineveh and told them to repent or else, and they did. But as the chapter opens, Jonah is sitting outside of town angry at God because he isn't going to destroy them. He thinks that God is too forgiving, which is a hoot, because it was Jonah who spent the first couple of chapters trying to avoid God's call to be a prophet. He's the one that had to be dragged to Nineveh in the belly of a whale. And he doesn't want to forgive them? That's funny. God must have a sense of humor. Adams points us to the humor of Jesus. In Matthew 22, it's the 21st verse, where there are those wonderful words, "Give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." Kind of a puzzling thing to say until you look at the context and the details. The paragraph opens with the words that the Pharisees and Sadducees wanted to entrap Jesus. They wanted to get him to say something that they could use against him. And so they come to him and ask this trick question. So is it legal for us Jews to pay taxes? If he said yes, he would have lost the popular support, because the people didn't want to pay taxes to Caesar, who claimed that he was the Son of God. If he said no, then they could throw him in prison and kill him for being a traitor. So Jesus takes a different tact. He says, so, have you got a coin on you? And one of them hands him a coin. And he says, so whose picture is on this? And they say, Caesar. You see, that's where it gets really interesting. Because the Jews were so offended by carrying coins with Caesar's picture on it that the Roman government had printed coins with no picture that the Jews could carry in order to be faithful to God. By carrying a coin with the picture of Caesar on it, they broke 2 of the 10 Commandments. He has just revealed the Pharisees and Sadducees to be hypocrites. Oops. When Jesus said, "Give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God's the things that are God's," he was looking at them, and they understood that they were the things that belonged to the emperor. They were the things that didn't belong to God. Wow. I imagine that they slunk out of town. Hypocrites. And then there is that phrase of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. "And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well." Now, at the time, most people had 2 items of clothing. They didn't need a closet. They were wearing their entire wardrobe. An inner garment and an outer cloak. And the law had said that if somebody wants to borrow your outer cloak, go ahead and give it to them, but they have to return it to you so you can use it at night to stay warm. Kind of an interesting way of borrowing, and so here comes this. It had to be a smarty pants who's trying to prove that he is super spiritual by his willingness to give up his outer cloak. And Jesus says to him, you need to understand that if you want to be super spiritual, give them your outer cloak, give them your inner garment, and walk around naked. Then we'll know that you're super spiritual. Don't you imagine that guy pulled his cloak around him a little tighter and walked to the back of the crowd? You and I meant Christianity to be very serious and dour. But the Bible is filled with humor and with irony. Stuff that's just too good to miss. So we're going to look at some of it over the next few weeks. I'll tell you what makes me laugh. It's the people that God calls to do something. They are all too human. If I keep expecting that God's going to call the most perfect, equipped, wonderful person to do something. Think of Jeremiah, who was just a child. Isaiah walks into church, sits down, and he's minding his own business. And all of a sudden, he sees a vision of God, and he's called to be a prophet. Now, that's funny. There's Amos, who's a sheep herder. David was the runt of the litter. Peter denied knowing Jesus. Paul had a thorn in the flesh, whatever that was. And Mark got homesick on the first missionary journey of Paul and had to be sent home. And these are the people that God calls. Make sure